Good morning. Welcome back. Well, afternoon, technically. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid pilot, Fraggeth, and today we're going to be doing some Mobile Suit Gundam. The novelization, we're reading it aloud because I have it. I'm trying to do some giant robot reading for Mecha Mondays because I've got a bevy of mecha literature farting around on my wall, mecha adjacent literature, and I want to read some of it aloud this year. We'll see how much we get done. I definitely want to get through this. I might wind up doing brain fart. Starship Troopers. There we go. That's the one. Starship Troopers armor and all you need is kill. I'd kind of want to do those as a trilogy just so people can see how the concept evolved. In terms of powered armor. Although if I'm gonna do that, it would really behoove me to do oh geez, which is the first Lensman novel that has powered armor in it? I think it's Galactic Patrol. It's either Galactic Patrol or Gray. It might be Gray Lensman actually. I can't keep them straight. I can't always remember what happens in which because there's some event overlap. Might be Gray Lensman. Yeah. Still, at that point, I'd want to read Galactic Patrol anyway, because it's great. Well, it's fun anyway. I depending on how much time we have in the year, I'd like to do Yukikaze, and I definitely want to do at least one or the first two volumes of the Robotech novelizations, just so people can experience those. They're not bad, actually. Unlike, say, the new novelizations for Doom, the video game, they're not bad. Actually, the novelizations for Doom aren't bad. First two are very, very straightforward adaptations, believe it or not. 3 and 4, on the other hand, are there. They exist, and they are something. Maybe a BattleTech novel or two, because those are nice. Anyway, I'm not starved for choice. I also want to do some of the Full Metal Panic series novelizations, which is where it started. It was the novels first, or the novel series. I think they're called light novels, but they're in volumes, so it's a couple of them put together. If I sound a little bedraggled, there are reasons for that. Mondays are tough right now. Anyway, previously on Mobile Suit Gundam, the novelization. Amuro got in the giant robot. He's also seen the absolute slaughterhouse that is combat in the Universal Century, particularly at this stage in the Universal Century. It is a mess. If you are an infantryman, it's not great. It's very ungood. You do not want a part of that smoke, as it were. To say nothing of the civilian casualties. Anyway, he gets in a giant robot and immediately takes someone out because that's how it goes. To quote Amuro, "Let me at him!" And then he gets right up in the guy's business and ends his life while also like blowing a hole. Does he blow a hole in the side of the colony? I can't remember. Yes, it blew a hole in the nearest wall of the colony. Yep, very good. I remember now. Anyway, I'm about to take some drugs to make my head a little less stuffy, and then we'll get cracking. Chapter 2: Escape from Side 7. The Zabi family doesn't trust me, Lieutenant Commander Shar Aznable thought, as light flashed from the Side 7 colony. Something had clearly gone wrong. And he knew he had only two real choices: to send in another strike team or retreat. And given his reputation and character, the latter was hardly appealing. It was he, after all, who had uncovered the information about the new Federation mobile suits in the first place, and he wasn't about to let anyone forget it. And a promotion, which it might lead to, was the only way he would be able to get closer to the Zabi family. Shar's father, Zeon Zum Daikun, had founded the original Republic of Zeon with the help of Degwin Sodo Zabi, the current ruler. But 14 years ago, after Zeon Daikun's death, Degwin had repudiated the republican system of government and changed the country to a principality, purging it of all loyal republican elements. Shar was too young at the time to have understood the difference between the two forms of government, but his foster father, Jimbaral, believed, was in fact convinced, that Zeon Daikun had not died a natural death and had actually been assassinated. Jimbaral had therefore raised Shar with a single burning obsession: to kill Degwin and topple the Zabi family. At age 15, Shar had managed to infiltrate back to Zeon alone, and, with the help of a few loyal friends of his father, obtained papers identifying himself as Shar Aznable. He attended a Zeon high school, and upon graduation entered the military academy. It was there that he became friends with Degwin's youngest son, Garma Zabi. And then, the war had erupted. Not surprisingly, Shar saw it as an opportunity. It seemed mere training for his eventual mission, especially when what was supposed to have been a short, neat little victory for Zeon turned into a protracted conflict. Zeon had quickly fallen into the grip of Zabi totalitarianism, but a long, drawn-out war, Shar reasoned, would eventually rock the foundations of the system. In the interim, he could try to rally some of the old Daikun loyalists and work to topple the Zabi family from within. It had to be done carefully. As much as Shar despised the Zabis, he had no intention of letting Zeon slide back under the influence of the absolute democracy enforced by the bureaucratic Federation on Earth. The fates are on my side, Shar thought with unshakable conviction. Just then, the crewman manning the laser search beams yelled, "Lieutenant Denham Sacco is returning, sir!" Shar ordered, "Put out some covering fire," and almost immediately several missiles streaked out of the Musai cruiser toward Side 7. "Take her forward," he directed. We're doing some... We're going to do some scouting around Side 7. The Musai's captain, Haman Tram, frowned. "But, Commander, don't you think that's a little risky?" Shar ignored him. The capillaries... Oh, sorry. I was thinking of the wrong person. "But, Commander, don't you think that's a little risky?" Shar ignored him. The capillaries in the man's nose indicated someone too fond of the bottle, and Shar despised anyone afraid to take a chance, simply out of fear of being demoted if he damaged his ship. And besides, the fact that Side 7 hadn't struck back yet seemed to indicate that Denham had at least accomplished something, even if he had gone on the attack without permission. 5 minutes later, when Denham docked in the Musai, Shar could have called him on the carpet, but he didn't. Denham had, after all, brought back valuable information on the Federation mobile suits, including photographs and videos. Scenes of Ensign Jean's Zaku being destroyed, even if painful to watch, could provide rare, concrete information on the performance of the enemy's new weapon. We still need to do more reconnaissance, Shar announced out loud on the bridge, and if Side 7's as shaken up as she seems, now's the time to get the information we need. We'll infiltrate in normal suits instead of Zaku's this time. Shortly thereafter, Shar took off from the Musai with 7 hand-picked crew members. Sorry to make you shuttle back and forth like this, he said, touching his normal suit helmet to Denham's for skin talk while in transit, but I've got to punish you somehow for disobeying my orders. Denham's face was hidden by his helmet's reflecting sun visor, but Shar could sense the man's burning shame. As the walls of the Side 7 colony gradually filled the men's frame of view, the Musai cruiser initiated a diversionary attack on the port side of the giant cylinder and finally met with some counterfire. With this as a cover, Shar and his men one by one landed safely on the wall of the giant cylinder. Inside the Side 7 colony, despite the fact that the initial Xeon attack had ended, Amuro Ray still hadn't had time to climb out of his Gundam mobile suit. There was so much to do: help transport an undamaged gun cannon mobile suit to the waiting Pegasus, aid civilian evacuees, and carry heavy construction materials for the Side 7 repair crews. There were an infinite number of ways to put a 16-meter-tall giant to work. To his surprise, Amuro found himself receiving orders transmitted from Warrant Officer Mirai Yashima and Ensign Bright Noah. They appeared alternately on the two-way communications display above the Gundam's main monitor, and told him what to do. Sometimes Chief Petty Officer Marker Clan also appeared. There seemed to be no senior officers left, at least not in the command center of the colony's port. "What in the world happened up there?" Amuro asked Marker. They were on good terms, and often spoke to each other. "There was a direct hit right near the Pegasus, Amuro, and it took out the main bridge and almost everyone on it. Captain Paolo's been badly wounded, so Bright's taken command of the ship from the sub-bridge. Not a single man from the surface combat units that went down into the colony has come back up. But more than anything right now, we need you to help get whatever's left of the Gundams and gun cannons up here." "What about the other pilots? Can't some of them help too? Sean got hit down there, but Ryu or even Kai ought to be around." "Ryu's up on the main deck checking the one gun cannon we already recovered, Amuro." "Chief Petty Officer Amuro Ray." Mirai Yashima's image suddenly appeared on the screen, reading from a file in front of her, and telling him what he already knew. "According to this report from the colony, there should be 3 Gundam models and 3 gun cannon models. We've got to get those other mobile suits up here." "There's only one other usable MS on this side," Amuro answered her, "and that's the gun cannon being transported up to you right now." But he knew that there still might be some usable mobile suit parts and maintenance equipment left in the colony, and that he should haul them up to the ship as soon as possible. He wished his father, who knew something about these things, were around to help him decide what was important and what was not. At the foot of the colony's mountain core, Amuro hoisted the other gun cannon's upper torso onto an elevator platform to send it up to the port area. As he did so, a van-style car skidded toward him from Zone B, and a chorus of plaintive voices emerged from inside. "You've got to help us!" There were around 20 civilians in the van, worried old people and women, who looked up imploringly at the Gundam. They, too, wanted to ride up on the elevator platform, and Amuro didn't have the heart to say no. With the Gundam's left hand, he signaled them to climb on board. Up to 3 humans could fit in the palm of a Gundam's hand, but if they fell out or were injured, he knew the military would be blamed, so he wasn't about to try that. He was more worried about the Gundam's beam rifle, which he still couldn't find. When the elevator platform finally began its ascent up the side of the colony's mountain core, it carried Amuro in his Gundam MS, the gun cannon, and over 20 people. It rose through the colony's cloud layer, and then, another 200 meters above that, it reached the port section, with its near weightless conditions. There, Amuro made certain that each of the civilian evacuees with him took firm hold of the lift grips that would transport them through the port area to the Pegasus. In another group of civilian evacuees, in the port area, he caught sight of Frau Bow. She looked tiny as she drifted toward him on a lift grip, staring up at his mobile suit with a worried look. "Hey, Frau!" Amuro called out, switching the Gundam's voice channel to external mode. "You all right? Where's your mom? Why isn't she with you? What happened?" At the sound of Amuro's amplified voice, the crowd of people moving on lift grips toward the Pegasus all stared up at his mobile suit in shock. The Gundam had no mouth, but the bulletproof, heat-resistant yellow glass panes covering its optical sensors resembled eyes, and gave its face an uncannily human look. There was also something decidedly weird about hearing such an ordinary, familiar language coming from a giant machine. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," Amuro quickly announced, trying to explain. "This is a Gundam model mobile suit, and I'm its pilot, Chief Petty Officer Amuro Ray." Then he opened the hatch in front of the Gundam's cockpit and found himself looking down at the civilians nearly 9 meters below him. True, he was now in an almost weightless environment where falling had little meaning, but even with his seatbelt fastened, the ground seemed far enough down to make him feel giddy. "Amuro! Oh, Amuro!" A stunned Frau called up to him, her voice quavering. "Mom and Gramps are dead!" As if Frau's words were a signal, the lift grips transporting Amuro's group of civilians began to move through the port area. The grips were rubberized rings, 2 meters in diameter, that slid along rails built into the walls and transported people through weightless areas. But if anyone let go of his or her ring while moving, the inertia alone could easily send them flying over a dozen meters. Old people and little children often lacked the physical wherewithal to control their own momentum, so they had to cling desperately to the rings until they came to a halt. "Go with the other evacuees to the Pegasus, Frau," Amuro called out, trying to sound in control. "I'll see you there later." He made sure she got on the third lift grip that came along, and then turned and hoisted the gun cannon's upper torso off the elevator platform. In the weightless environment, this took a special technique. To counter the inertia created, he had to simultaneously exert a counterforce in the opposite direction with the Gundam's other hand. Then he activated the electromagnets on the soles of the Gundam's feet and began walking through the port area toward the Pegasus. Arriving at the ship's number 1 hatch, Amuro found Ryu and several Mecha men already working on the other gun cannon. As he lowered the gun cannon's upper torso he was carrying, the comm monitor on his cockpit flickered to life, and Ensign Bright's face appeared. "Mr. Amuro, we've got beta test reports on the Gundam from the Side 7 mobile suit test site. I want you to go over these and memorize them. Understand? Better yet, copy them on your computer scanner." Bright's eyebrows were arched, and his voice high-pitched. He was doing his best under the circumstances, but Amuro had never liked the man's overzealousness. Nonetheless, when Bright sent the documents to the Gundam's upper right monitor, Amuro scanned and copied them into the Gundam's main memory bank, and then began displaying them in enlarged format on the main monitor. "I'm blowing up the specs now, sir," said Amuro. "Could you explain them to me?" And then, thinking of his father, he asked, "By the way, how'd you get these?" But Bright wasn't listening, and merely continued giving orders. "The Gundam's spare armor plating's still at the main test site, and so are the magnetic control cores for the beam rifle. And finally, we've got to destroy whatever's left of the mobile suits that were hit inside the colony. We can't afford to leave anything behind." "Can't you just let this other gun cannon help me, sir? It'll take too long with just me and this Gundam." "Don't worry, kid. I'm not an idiot," Bright replied. "I'm going to send Chief Petty Officer Ryu Jose out with you." Selah Mass had just turned 20. She had immigrated to the... Oh, of course, the page won't flip. She had immigrated to the Side 7 colony voluntarily 2 years earlier, but it was rather unusual since hardly anyone volunteered anymore. In recent years, most emigrants left Earth against their will. The only ones able to remain on the planet were those whose political views were approximately orthodox, or who had special connections to the Federation government. Selah had nonetheless had her own reasons for coming to Side 7. The daughter of Zeon Zum Daikun, her real name was Artesia Som Daikun. Her brother was Casval Rem Daikun, otherwise known in Zeon as Shar Aznable. Selah's father, Zeon, had died when she was 3 years old. One of Zeon's right-hand men, Jimba Ral, together with his wife, had taken in the two Daikun children, and with them fled the collapsing republic, hoping to live in safety on Earth. To ensure success, the Rals took an enormous amount of money, with which they purchased the respected family name of Mass in southern Europe. This had enabled them not only to pass as full members of Earth's elite society, but also to safely raise both children under the names of Edward and Selah Mass. Over the years, the Rals repeatedly told the two Daikun children that their father had been assassinated in one of Degwin Zabi's plots. When Shar reached high school age, it was this, more than anything else, that fostered his unshakable desire to return to Zeon and destroy the ruling Zabi family. But Selah was different. She had grave doubts about her brother's obsession and about the course of action he had chosen. Still, he was her only brother, and had always been good to her, and she did not want to lose him. When she finally found out that he had secretly returned to Zeon, she wept for 3 days and nights. She began to loathe her foster parents' fixation with revenge, and began to hate them instead. She thought about running away from home, but upon hearing about construction of the new Side 7 colony, she hit upon the idea of emigrating. It took a year to persuade her aging foster father, Jimba Ral, to let her go. "If a father truly loves his daughter," she had lamented one day, why should he derive pleasure from her misery?"
"Artesia, dearest,"
Jimba had finally replied, giving up.
"if you insist, you may go."
Selah had once dreamed of becoming a doctor, but she instead enrolled in a school that trained mid-level technicians for the Side 7 project. And when construction began on the first colony, she did emigrate. She wanted nothing to do with the Republic of Zeon or the Zabi family. Unfortunately for Selah, when war erupted between the Federation and the Principality of Zeon, it became impossible not to be involved. Along with the other civilians on the Side 7 colony, she was pressed into working for the military, and when she qualified as a communications expert in 6 months, they wanted her to formally enlist. The military were always looking for skilled people, and nearly a quarter of all personnel in both Federation and Zeon forces were now women, or waves as they were called. In some fields, such as supply, communications, and armaments, the ratio of women was even higher. Still, no matter how alien and despicable Zeon's social system, Selah had no interest in going to war with it, especially when it bore her father's name. But then an event occurred that shook her beliefs. As a comtech on the Side 7 colony, Selah had been assigned to work at the Gundam Mobile Suit test site. There she was given strict orders, in case of an emergency, to at all cost make sure that documents never fell into the hands of the enemy. As a result, after the first Zaku rocket attack, she had hurriedly collected and destroyed all the important-looking materials she could find, even if they were only simple code lists for internal use, or work schedules. When the attacking Zakus grew closer and closer, Sayla and the other comtechs left the test site and moved over to the air defense capsule, an emergency escape system that could, in time of disaster, use the spinning colony's centrifugal force to escape from the side. But when the Federation Gundam destroyed one of the Zaku intruders, the resulting explosion warped the rails of the escape system and rendered it unusable. The sergeant in Sayla's unit therefore issued the order, "Move to the Pegasus!" and the group began to head toward the colony's port area. Along the way, Sayla occasionally spotted physical files that someone else had discarded, so she stopped to either pour acid on them or burn them. It was technically someone else's responsibility, but she didn't want to take any chances. If any documents survived and the test site supervisor found out, Sayla's entire unit could be slapped around, and she didn't want that. She wasn't about to give the military, which seemed to love corporal punishments like slapping and spanking, any excuse to apply its fetish to civilians like herself. As a result of her diligence, Sayla lagged behind the rest of the group and had to dash alone across the area where the Zaku had been destroyed. She had been taught not to worry about residual radiation after the explosion of a mobile suit or even a warship's nuclear fusion engine, but she knew there were limits to this assurance. After all, if an explosion were big enough and blew a hole in the colony's outer wall, even the whoosh of escaping air could kill a person. Luckily for Sayla, the hole from the Zaku's blast seemed to have already been blocked, probably by objects sucked into it, and the fierce wind had died down. As she ran toward the elevator platform at the base of the colony mountain, though, she spotted someone in a red-colored normal suit dash into the ruins of a building. How odd, she first thought, that a Federation unit would use red for their suits. There was also something odd about the way the man carried himself. She stopped in her tracks, picked up a revolver from the body of a fallen Federation soldier, and snuck back toward the ruins. To her amazement, the man in the red normal suit was pointing a camera at the wreckage of a gun cannon destroyed earlier by a Zaku, taking pictures. And then she remembered. She had recently seen a Federation report describing the uniforms used by the Zeon military. The man before her fit the description. As a civilian, Sayla was theoretically under no obligation to engage a Zeon soldier in combat, but in times of stress, theory does not always fit reality. Something about the red-suited man's bearing made her heart pound. Implausibly, perhaps, she almost felt attracted to him. "I've got to capture him," she thought, as her legs propelled her out from the cover of a shattered wall in the ruins. "Take your helmet off and put your hands over your head," she yelled, as threateningly as she could. The man in the red normal suit, Shar, was stunned. Why hadn't he sensed the approach of such an obviously rank amateur? True, he'd been preoccupied with collecting materials on the Federation's new mobile suit, but that was no excuse. Normally, his entire nervous system would have been scanning 360 degrees for anything unusual. After all, it was this ability, more than anything else, that had made him and his Zaku feared far and wide as the Red Comet. He stood stunned as a young blonde woman in double-handed firing posture pointed a revolver straight at him. Could the Fates have wanted him to meet this person and deliberately created a blind spot in his consciousness? Before completely recovering his senses, Shar noticed that the woman's gun was shaking, and realized that she'd never be able to hit him even if she fired. He jumped at her and immediately heard the gun discharge, but he ignored it. The toe of his normal-suited foot connected with the gun and sent it flying into the air. The woman staggered back, amazed. Then, the instant Shar looked into her blue eyes, he knew. It was Artesia, his sister. She flinched and then glared back at him. In her expression he read terror and a defiant refusal to give in. "Artesia!" he cried. She looked at him, at first puzzled. Then she straightened and looked again. But just then Shar felt the reverberations of giant footsteps and knew they belonged to one of the new Federation mobile suits scrambling down the foot of the colony mountain toward him. He also knew he had to get out of the area immediately. By the time Sayla recognized him and rushed forward, calling, "Casval!" he had already spun around, ignited the small vernier jets strapped to his back, and soared into the air. Maneuvering through the air to get out of the Gundam's field of vision, he heard his sister behind him exclaim, "Casval!" once more as she tripped and fell. Sorry, "Casval! Thunk! Oof! As she tripped and fell. Moments later, Sayla was still staring in the direction in which the man in the red normal suit had disappeared, thinking he might have taken refuge in some other distant ruin. To her surprise, behind her she heard the voice of a very young man say, "Climb up on the Gundam's palm. I'm going to raise this whole area." She turned and looked up, and saw a giant mobile suit kneeling next to her, extending its left hand. "Hop on board, but keep your head down," the voice said. Immediately below the mobile suit's chest, in the area equivalent to the human solar plexus, a hatch opened, and a young pilot peered down from it. As directed, Sayla climbed onto the mobile suit's hand, whereupon its fingers slowly but gently closed around her, as if forming a shield. It wasn't a pleasant sensation. She kept her head down and tensed, then felt a floating sensation as the Gundam stood up and began transporting her. The steel hand wasn't designed to carry people, so to avoid falling out she had to push as hard as she could with her arms against its sides. They were moving 10 meters above the ground, so she also closed her eyes to avoid her sense of vertigo. By now, Amuro had found the beam rifle, and when the Gundam reached and boarded the elevator platform at the colony's mountain core, he turned and fired at the MS test site, scoring a direct hit with a napalm shell. "That fries the documents all right," Sayla thought, astonished, "but it'll contaminate the remaining colony air." When the elevator platform reached the colony port level, a giant hatch opened to receive the Gundam, and Sayla saw the same red-suited man of her earlier encounter zip by in the air in front of them. He had his vernier jets on full, and roared through the hatch into the port's weightless environment. Sayla felt the hand of the Gundam that was holding her twitch. Its other hand rose up and pointed the beam rifle toward the port, but didn't fire. Using a beam rifle on a single man would be overkill, and might even hit the Pegasus, moored 2 kilometers straight ahead. But just when the red normal suit disappeared from view, Sayla heard gunfire coming from the direction of the ship. "Casval," she murmured. The Gundam strode quickly toward the Pegasus in the docking bay, each footstep creating a loud echo. But then the sound of gunfire ended, and Sayla heard a small explosion from the direction of the port's exit hatch. When the Gundam reached the Pegasus, she heard one of the crewmen on deck running around yelling, "A Zeon infiltrator's blasted a hole in the outer airlock and escaped!" No one paid any attention to Sayla as the Gundam gently lowered her to the ground. Behind her, Sayla heard a nearly hysterical voice call out, "Over here! Please! You've got to help me treat some of these wounded!" Turning around, she saw that it belonged to a young female colonist she knew, Fra Bow, on the gangway 2 levels above her. She kicked off the floor and floated up toward her. On the sub-bridge of the Pegasus, Ensign Bright ordered, "Have the Gundam MS precede us supported by the 2 gun cannons, and give me full combat speed as soon as we clear the colony's port." Then, turning to the ship operators strategically seated above him atop a crane-like arm for maximum monitoring capability, he called out, "Keep me posted on every move the Musai makes." The operators, Chief Petty Officer Marker Clan and Petty Officer First Class Oscar Dublin, were awfully young, but they were among the most dependable survivors on the bridge, and they had been formally trained. Mirai Yashima, the young warrant officer standing in as helmsman, was part of the same student group mobilized into military service as Bright. It was all she could do to cling to the ship's wheel. Almost everyone on the Pegasus was inexperienced. The ship's normal chain of command had been wiped out earlier when the Musai cruiser had fired one of its 4 large TAM missiles at Side 7's core, piercing 4 layers of armor and nearly destroying the Pegasus's primary bridge. With Captain Paolo and the other officers gravely wounded, except for the men who had been in the ship's engine room, the rest of the surviving crew, including those now manning the warship's guns and the missile launchers, were almost all new recruits. The only mobile suit pilots left alive were all cadets. Amuro Ray would have to handle the Gundam with Hayato Kobayashi as a backup, and Ryu Jose and Kai Shiden would have to operate the 2 gun cannons. The giant 4-layered airlock doors of the Side 7 colony opened, and the Pegasus sailed forth from the port. Mirai, manning the helm and looking deathly pale, bit her lip. "You can relax a little now, Mirai," Bright said, tapping her on the shoulder. "The laser sensors will help lead us out of here." He was so scared himself that unless he did or said something, he wouldn't have been able to stand the tension. As the Pegasus emerged into the vastness of space, the shining orb of Earth came into view, fully illuminated by the sun. Sometimes it was possible to see little Luna 2 shining above it, but right now the asteroid was overwhelmed by the brilliance of the mother planet. Bright called out to the operators, louder than need be. "Marker! Oscar! Where's that Musai cruiser?"
Must be in the colony's shadow, sir. We can't get a reading on it.
Mirai, how far out are we from the colony?
3 kilometers, sir."
On hearing Mirai's nervous reply, Bright inquired of no one in particular,
"Think the mobile suits can keep up with us?"
There was no answer, because no one on the bridge knew. But just then the rear door to the bridge opened, and the ship's medic, Sunmalo, wheeled Captain Paolo into the room on a gurney. Beads of sweat oozed from Paolo's brow as his eyes hurriedly scanned the instrument readouts.
Don't worry about the performance of the mobile suits, Bright," he whispered between stabs of pain. "You've got to take that Musai off our tail first."
"Maximum combat speed! Ready stern missile launchers!"
Bright yelled, switching the captain's phone to shipwide. "All crew, double-check the air in each section of the ship." It wasn't easy to move through space using a normal suit's vernier jets. Shar and his men couldn't see their destination, their Musai cruiser, so they navigated using Luna 2 and the Side 7 colony as reference points. Checking them every once in a while to keep their bearings, the sun being their primary reference point, and taking into account their own speed, they calculated how many seconds to fire their verniers and in what direction. But they had to be careful to avoid the worst enemy of all free spacewalkers: panic. The physical sensation of floating in a weightless environment can psychologically resemble that of falling, and unless constantly reminded that one is positioned above Earth or above a colony, it is all too easy to become totally disoriented.
"Musai, do you read me?"
Shar spoke into his radio receiver while double-checking to see that his squad of 7 men was still following him. The Minovsky interference was intense, but at close range radio communication was often possible.
"Yes, read you,"
came the faint reply from the ship. "Get my Zaku ready, and Denim's too," Shar barked. "The enemy's headed our way." Shar was determined to engage and fight the new Federation mobile suit he had just seen. From what he could tell, it was probably a high-performance model, but he had no way of knowing how well it performed in the vacuum of outer space. After losing a Zaku to it inside the colony, he felt the least he could do would be to find out specifically how it operated. After all, he wasn't called the Red Comet for nothing.
In Chief Petty Officer Amuro Ray's Gundam, at the far right corner of the main monitor indicated two enemy objects approaching. Laser sensors could be accurate on their own terms, even with Minovsky interference, but as Lieutenant Ralph often said, until you confirmed something visually, it wasn't confirmed. But whatever this was, the monitor indicated it was approaching at high speed. On the bridge of the Pegasus, operator Marker Clan read the same signals and yelled down from his perch at Bright. "Judging by the size, sir, it looks like Zaku's, but one of them's closing in on us faster than I've ever heard possible."
The other's speed matches a Zaku profile exactly, sir," chimed in Oscar, the other operator. "I'm sure they're both Zakus."
"Ready anti-aircraft guns!" Bright screamed, at the same time glancing behind him at Medic Sunmalo and Captain Paolo. Thinking he had heard the wounded skipper say something, he went over to the man, who was still strapped in his gurney. He bent over and listened, and heard Paolo whisper, If it's a fast red Zaku, it's Shar Aznable. He destroyed over 10 Federation warships with his machine. They call him the Red Comet. You've got to get the ship out of here." Paolo's face looked contorted, not from the pain of his wounds, but from fear. And he said it again. "Get out of here!" Out in space, in the Gundam suit, Amuro saw a reddish point of light weave through the stars toward him at high speed, and he felt a chill run down his spine. For a second he thought he was looking at a real red comet, but then his main monitor showed a close-up of a red Zaku. In the middle of its head, behind a panel that looked like the windshield of an Elicar, a pink-colored mono-eye flashed, and it was sighting down the barrel of a handheld rifle. Amuro gently twisted the left and right joystick levers in front of him toward each other, and felt the sudden G-force as the entire Gundam spun sharply to the right. The Zaku fired, and a tracer streaked brightly through the darkness. Amuro knew a single tracer meant that his opponent had actually fired a burst of 5 rounds. With a horrible sinking feeling, he remembered the way Lieutenant Ralph had lectured him and the others.
"You gotta watch out for the bastards who fire long bursts with rifles or machine guns, 'cause one of the rounds might hit you. But as long as you can still see the barrel of their guns, you're okay, 'cause it means you're still alive. It's the ones who never waste a shot you really ought to be scared of. They'll make you really stay on your toes. What's that? You want to know how to spot 'em? Let me tell you, in real combat, you'll just know. And when you know, you'll probably already be dead. So the first thing to do when you sight an enemy is to pray he's an uncoordinated idiot. That's your only hope."
Amuro felt lucky. He had managed to dodge the red comet's blast. The left and right monitors in his cockpit began displaying data, but he didn't have time to look. It was all he could do to track the enemy Zaku streaking across his main display. When the red machine seemed to hesitate, he pulled his beam rifle's trigger. A multipolar super-electromagnetic coil sucked energy from the engine in the Gundam's midriff, oscillated and accelerated heavy metal particles inside the beam rifle, and then blasted them out the barrel. Each shot was accompanied by an enormous burst of light, which could reveal one's position to the enemy, so the rifle was best used only when in constant motion. But the magnitude of destruction a blast could cause more than offset the risk. Zaku's were so well armored they could withstand a direct missile hit. The Gundam's beam rifle and beam saber were the only weapons that could take them out. And Zaku's didn't have them. The blast from the Gundam's rifle sliced through the blackness of space, leaving a trail of white light, but the red comet was already bearing down from another direction. If Amuro had kept his eye on the light, he would have completely overlooked the Zaku. But the moment he pulled the trigger, he knew he'd missed, so he had deliberately broadened his focus. Like a real red comet, the Zaku bore down on him, and its mono-eye flashed again. Amuro fired the Vulcan cannon in the Gundam's forehead, knowing it couldn't destroy the Zaku, but hoping to at least knock one of its camera eyes out of action. The red Zaku swooped left, executing an almost perfect 90-degree turn. Amuro maneuvered the Gundam to square off against it, and saw the small monitor on the left side of his instrument panel flash a warning. He jammed the joysticks to put the Gundam into an evasive maneuver, and saw two bands of tracers. The Zaku had fired twice as many shells as last time. It was trying for a death blow, but Amuro had managed to dodge it again. Amuro's reflexes were better than average, and the Gundam was responding to them instantly. Against Amuro and his Gundam MS, any other Zaku would have seemed positively leaden in reaction. Char's Zaku had undergone fine-tuning, it was true, but Char had really earned the name Red Comet for his unnerving ability to coax his machine into giving 110% of its potential performance, and to engage the enemy at breathtaking speed. Nonetheless, even Char was amazed by the Gundam. As soon as he had obtained information about the new enemy suits being developed, he had conducted mock battles once or twice using other Zakus as stand-ins. But that had been like child's play compared to this. The real Federation MS turned on a dime above and to the left of him, beams of light zapping toward him from its rifle. The beams seemed so powerful that Char's hair practically stood on end, and he at first thought they must have come from the big guns on the Side 7 colony itself. Then he realized that making a beam gun compact enough to carry as an MS rifle was a particularly diabolical act of genius. Whatever was sacrificed in destructive power was more than compensated by the MS's innate agility, and it would only take one blast to wipe out a Zaku. The very thought of it made Char's blood boil. There had to be a way to put the white MS out of action. The Federation pilot was no doubt good, but, although he couldn't put his finger on it, there was something about the slightly awkward movements of the suit that convinced him the pilot inside was still a novice. This spurred him on, and he was seized by the same rush of adrenaline as in the past, when he had moved in on one of the Federation's Magellan-class battleships. The only difference this time was in the size of the target. But Char was too smart to judge an enemy by size. He had an uncanny ability to evaluate his opponent's total strength and weaknesses. Turning his Zaku hard toward where he sensed his enemy would be in a few seconds, Char spotted the white suit and exulted, "Got him!" His main monitor displayed the crosshairs of his rifle scope. He lined them up with the gun sight, and then cranked his MS up to maximum combat speed. It wasn't a rash act, but a tried and true tactic used to overwhelm the enemy. Then he fired. But something unexpected happened. Unlike the Federation forces Char had met in the past, the white suit had somehow dodged his attack. What was going on? It was then that Char thought the unthinkable. Could the Federation pilot possibly be a new type? No one in the Federation, he was certain, was yet aware of the new type concept, which postulated the emergence of a new type of humans. After all, he himself had first heard about it a few months earlier, when he had contacted the Flanagan Institute. The last thing in the world he wanted to believe was that he was really confronting one now. He wanted desperately to believe that the Federation forces were just using some uncannily skilled pilots. Yet, as implausible as it seemed, the enemy pilot who had first moved like an amateur was already looking more and more like an expert. There seemed far more to the incredible leap in skill level than first met the eye. Biting his lower lip in frustration, Shar fired a burst from his rifle. The tracers from it left a trail of light that disappeared between the stars. And then, in the midst of the battle, he heard a brash voice cut through the static in his headphones.
This is Lieutenant Denham. Do you read me?
"Watch out, Denham!" Shar yelled back. "The white suit's a tough customer," he replied. The fool, he thought, noticing a light on the top right of his instrument panel. Denham's Zaku was emitting its IFF, identification friend or foe, laser signals, and in the presence of an alert enemy, that was tantamount to suicide. Denham obviously thought he should identify his position to his superior to avoid a case of mistaken identity, or to avoid getting in the way, but he was underestimating Shar's ability. It was being overly considerate. Of course, I'm getting a phone call. Shar barked over the intercom, "Denham, turn off your damn ID signal!" But it was too late. Enemy fire streaked out of the area in space where the Federation warship, the Trojan Horse, was, and converged on Denham's Zaku. But Denham was a seasoned warrior, a veteran of the Battle of Loam, and he wasn't about to let anyone turn him into space dust that easily. He skillfully evaded it and continued in hot pursuit of the White MS. And then it happened. A direct blast from a beam rifle pierced Denham's Zaku at its midriff. And it came, not from a Federation warship, but from the White MS. First, the Zaku slowly scattered beams of light into space, and then it emitted an enormous flash. In an instant, it evaporated.
Denham!
Shar screamed, hardly believing his eyes. It was true. The white mobile suit's beam rifle did have as much power as a cruiser's main cannon. Amuro had just dodged a blast from the red comet above and to the right of him when he first detected an odd signal on his IFF monitor. The signal source was around 4 degrees above the red comet, and it was another Zaku, moving about half the speed of the red comet. "Just give me 3 seconds," Amuro prayed, as he drew a bead and fired 2 shots so close together that they almost formed a single band of light. When the beams scored a direct hit in the Zaku's waist, his main monitor reacted to the burst of light that followed by instantly activating an automatic filter. Nonetheless, the screen showed a huge white, saucer-shaped orb of light gradually fading into the blackness of space. "One down," Amuro exulted to himself. But the next instant he spotted the red comet bearing down on him straight out of the blast's residual light. And when his monitor returned to normal, he saw, almost heard, the red Zaku's mono-eye flare. Gwom. Instinctively, he pulled the trigger for his rifle. Another beam shot forth and crossed in space with one of the tracers fired by the Zaku. On Earth, the sound of a 120mm cannon merging with the supersonic roar of a beam rifle would have been unbearable. But this was outer space. The 2 mobile suits silently crossed paths in the vacuum. And with a shock, Amuro suddenly realized his suit was running low on energy. Around the same time, Shar began to curse himself because he had run out of ammo. In theory, Zaku's were supposed to conserve ammunition so it would last until they returned to the mothership, but something about the white enemy MS's humanoid face had irked him and made him squander his shells. Now, just when he had the enemy where he could polish him off, he was out of ammo. Glancing back at his opponent, he gnashed his teeth in frustration, convinced that he could have scored a direct hit. "How could I be so stupid?" he swore, as he pulled away from the combat zone at high speed. Amuro had no way of knowing the fight was over. He had 6 spare shells built into the Gundam's head, but once the beam rifle's energy was depleted, it took 30 minutes to recharge. There was little he could actually do, but he was too psyched up to quit. He scanned the heavens 360 degrees several times, and wandered through the combat zone until the Pegasus finally issued an order to return to ship. When he at last neared the Pegasus again, he opted for the safest docking procedure of all. He asked the ship to throttle its main engines back as much as possible so he could enter through the rear hatch. When guide sensors all around him went into action, all he had to do was line up with them and leave the rest to the computer. "Good work, Mr. Amuro," Bright said, ensconced in the captain's seat in the middle of the sub-bridge. "Now that the Musai cruisers lost 2 Zakus, they won't come after us for a while, and judging by the way the Red Comet pulled out of the fray, I'd say he ran out of ammunition. In the meantime, I want you to work on getting the Gundam and the gun cannons ready again. Some of the Mecha men on board were involved in testing on Side 7, and they can help." Amuro formally saluted and intoned, "Yes, sir! Chief Petty Officer Amuro Ray, descending to the second flight deck." He noticed a young woman to his left on the bridge, with her back turned. It was Mirai Yashima, the warrant officer, who always had a friendly, gentle face. He wished she'd turn around and look at him, but she did not. On the Musai, Shar finally returned and ascended to the bridge, where he was greeted by an over-friendly Lieutenant Junior Grade Dren.
That white mobile suit's after absolutely terrifying, isn't it, sir? Why, those blasted feds.
Shar held up his hand to stop the prattle. He stared out the window of the Musai's bridge at the area into which the Federation Trojan horse had disappeared. Luna, too, had moved out of the glare of Earth and was visible on its own as a shining half-circle. There had been nothing wrong with his basic strategy, Shar concluded, but Zeon's intelligence-gathering efforts clearly left much to be desired. And never, in his wildest dreams, had he expected to run into his younger sister Artesia on the Side 7 colony, of all places. For a moment he started to feel a little sentimental, but he quickly collected himself. Forcing himself to reflect on the day's action instead, he muttered to himself, "I hate to admit it, but maybe I made a mistake. I'll just have to write it off to youthful inexperience." Chapter 3: The California Crush. The Pegasus was headed for Luna 2, the former asteroid Juno. Now a Federation base, it had a traumatic but pivotal history. The plan to move it into the Moon's orbit around Earth had been announced in UC 0035, but taken 10 years to complete. First mainly mined and hacked at for resources, Federation forces had already begun fortifying it by UC 67, when construction on Side 7 began. And then, in 1 week of January UC 0079, when Zeon simultaneously struck Sides 1, 2, 4, and 5, and annihilated well over 100 Federation colonies, Luna 2 was heavily bombarded with missiles, and any and all surface construction was shattered beyond recognition. Largely because of this attack, Federation forces were deprived of 1/3 of their entire fleet of ships before they could effectively resist. There was one exception. General Revel's fleet, on Side 5 at the time, did manage to put up a fight, and because Zeon was unable to destroy Revel in its initial strikes, it was forced to throw much of its remaining forces into yet another attack. And this time the Federation forces rallied in a counterattack. The result was the first major fleet battle in outer space. The Battle of Loom, as it came to be known, ended tragically in the nearly total devastation of Side 5 and the destruction of most warships in both Zeon and Federation fleets. For over 8 months afterward, Federation forces frantically rebuilt Luna 2 and refurbished and expanded their fleet. Zeon, similarly, attempted to consolidate its hegemony in space by constructing its Granada Fortress on the Moon and its Solomon Space Fortress in the area where Side 1 had formerly existed. Several smaller strategic skirmishes continued throughout space as both sides attempted to expand the territory under their control. One of Zeon's strongholds was a giant, ultra-advanced satellite called California, which orbited Earth on a 30-degree slant to the plane of the ecliptic. It served as a base for a Zeon reconnaissance unit, and was primarily charged with scouting enemy movements on Earth and monitoring Federation activity on Luna 2. To avoid direct enemy attacks from the latter, it moved constantly in a random orbit and sowed as many Minovsky particles as possible in the vicinity. On California, a sallow-faced young captain, Garma Zabi, read an electronic message from Lieutenant Commander Shar. Have information on Federation Forces Operation V. Will drive Trojan Horse ship carrying new mobile suits into your area. Capture and destroy them. Not bad for the class valedictorian, Garma said, smiling and indulging in his habit of curling a lock of his bangs around his right index finger. Sounds like Shar is going to bring me a little present. Garma, the youngest son of Degwin Zabi, had been 8 years old when his father had crowned himself absolute ruler of the Principality of Zeon. Whether from upbringing or genetics, he grew up to be extremely indulgent of other people. If tolerance was his good quality, it also made him an ineffectual leader. Worse yet, he was far too immature for the level of responsibility he possessed as a result of his family connections. On California, instead of waiting for further contact, as Shar had recommended at the end of his message, he excitedly ordered Rear Admiral Zom, the nominal base commanding officer, to immediately ready 3 Gao attack carriers so he could take off and intercept the Pegasus. Traveling at full speed, the Pegasus would normally take over 10 hours to reach Luna 2 from Side 7, so to divert the Federation ship from its course, the Musai cruiser periodically fired blasts at it from its twin megaparticle guns. In reality, the Musai had only 2 of its large TAM missiles left, but Ensign Bright was no match for the more experienced Shar, so the Musai cruiser's feints worked, with the result that both ships proceeded on a zigzag course, just as Shar had planned. If California wasn't in its southerly orbit now, we'd never be able to pull this off, Shar said, laughing, to Dren on the bridge of the Musai.
You really think it'll work, sir?
Dren asked, unable to conceal his nervousness about the plan.
They say the Federation ship has an awful lot of firepower.
Well, it's working right now, isn't it? Shar retorted. Then, turning to the beat-nosed skipper of his ship for a change, he added, Isn't it, Haman? As long as there was no threat to his own life, the captain had no problem with diversionary attacks. Haman? At the sound of his name, the captain blew his nose and laughed. But with Shar's next words, he fell silent, and the color drained from his face. We'll probably lose a Musai-class ship in the process of testing the Fed's new military capability, Shar announced, but it can't be helped. I want the crew's combat rations increased. We're going to try to catch the Trojan Horse at California. The Pegasus was in an unusual situation. In addition to its crew, it was carrying nearly 105 evacuees from Side 7. Normally, this would not have been permitted. 2 or 3 holes blasted in a colony as big as Side 7 didn't usually didn't mean the loss of the cylinder's atmosphere, or even require the total evacuation of its residents. Basic functions would continue. Total malfunction was almost inconceivable. Solar-powered colonies, such as the one at Side 7, were almost perpetual motion machines, and once activated, their ecosystems went through their natural cycles, and basic materials were largely recycled. Being man-made, they wouldn't last forever, but as long as the sun continued to shine, they were exceedingly stable environments, especially compared to the state of permanent energy crisis on Earth. Their future was also guaranteed by the Antarctic Treaty, which both Xeon and Federation governments had signed after the carnage of the one-week battle. The depopulation caused by the war had so terrified both parties that they had agreed to refrain from completely destroying each other's colonies. Fra Bow moved to the rotating artificial gravity sector of the Pegasus and busied herself treating the injured. She was becoming inured to it now, and open wounds and exposed organs were no longer a shock.
Get me some type A and type AB blood for transfusions,
Sunmalo, the nervous, bespectacled medic, said to Frau.
There's got to be some left.
Jumping over the bodies of several wounded soldiers, Frau ran to the ship's blood bank as asked. Along the way, she couldn't help thinking what a horrible situation the ship seemed to be in. It was supposed to be a warship, but there were so few military men around in the sector, that she began to wonder how in the world the Federation could ever win the war. And she was irritated by the fact that she had absolutely no idea where they were headed.
I wonder where Amuro is, she thought.
It occurred to her that he might have been killed. She had known him, after all, not as a particularly strong boy, but as one who always needed someone to keep an eye on him. But she swept the thought out of her mind, remembering how he had looked when he had opened the Gundam hatch to greet her back at Side 7. Amuro was now a full-fledged military man. At the now half-empty blood bank, she picked up 2 bottles of the blood types requested and started to return to the room where the medic was. Along the way, among a crowd of civilians milling about, to her shock she heard children crying, and saw a young boy, certainly under 10, trying to calm 2 even younger children while sniffling himself.
What happened?
Fra asked.
My mom.
The oldest boy started to say. The oldest boy started to say something, but began weeping uncontrollably. It was almost as though the gentle sound of Fra's voice had broken the dam of his pent-up tears.
Now you just wait here, Fra soothed. I'll go look for your parents later.
She took the children into what seemed like an officer's vacant quarters, had them sit down, and, after comforting them again, started running back to the medic with the blood. They bawled mightily when she left, but that somehow reassured her. If they had that much energy in their lungs, she knew they'd be all right. Besides, despite their own tears, the 2 older boys had tried to comfort the little girl. Somewhere, Fra thought, she had seen the girl before. On the sub-bridge of the Pegasus, Ensign Bright remarked to Sayla Mass, "You're just what we need. We're incredibly short-handed. All you'll have to do is relay any messages that come in from Luna 2 or Side 7. I'll take care of most of the calls inside the ship, but I could sure use your help when things get really hectic around here." When things really get hectic around here. Bright should have been strapped in the captain's chair, but he felt better talking while standing. Sayla answered, "Understood, sir." Then she floated over to the... Sorry, losing my facial muscle composure. Then she floated over to the comm panel on the right side of the bridge. An enlisted man drifted by her, his head covered with blood from a wound. For a second she thought he was smiling at her, but then she realized the expression was frozen. He was dead. The comm panel had 5 monitors on it, and Sayla had no way of knowing which section of the Pegasus each showed. Nor, if there were any voice contact, did she know how to prioritize it. The main laser comm channel appeared open, but silent. Then she saw a close-up of a cadet's face on one of the right-hand monitors, and he seemed to be yelling. She pressed the button, activating his voice channel.
"I finished readying the gun cannon,"
Yelled an awfully impatient young man of mixed ethnic background.
"Now what?"
The, gun cannon, you say? Sayla answered, tentatively.
"Yeah. This is Ryu Jose. Right now, I'm talking about my gun cannon."
Sayla turned and called over to Bright, standing under the operator crane behind her. Sir, Mr. Ryu Jose says his, gun cannon's ready. What? Bright picked up the captain's phone and curtly ordered Ryu to stand by.
"I don't mind standing by," Ryu snapped at Sayla from the little monitor, "but I want to know what the hell's going on. How are we doing?"
He wants to know how the battle's going, Sayla relayed. Tell him we're sending the information to the control room and for him to look at it there, Bright screamed in reply, forsaking any politeness toward his newfound crew member. Turning to one of the operators perched on the bridge crane, he added, I want you to compile information on our status and send it to each combat sector, on the double. Yes, sir, called out Petty Officer Oscar with a gesture that almost looked like a salute. Watching the exchange between the two men, Sayla sensed things weren't going very well. Ryu Jose laughed bitterly in the monitor in front of Sayla and said,
"Well, I guess I just learned what I wanted to know by overhearing Bright's scream. By the way, I'm Chief Petty Officer Ryu Jose. I'd sure love to take you out on a date sometime."
Rather than being put off by such forwardness on an official comm channel, Sayla found herself staring at the image in the monitor in front of her. Was he half black and half Caucasian? Or was he part Arab? She really couldn't tell, but when he smiled, his white teeth flashed beautifully against the dark tone of his skin. Well, she replied flirtatiously, maybe, if I have the time. By the way, my name's Sayla Mass. Why did she say that? She was shocked by her own friendliness to a total stranger.
Ryu's image said, "We know you're a newcomer, Sayla, but hang in there."
Then his monitor went blank, and as if on cue, a close-up of a different enlisted man appeared on a monitor on the far left of the panel. It was Chief Petty Officer Marker, the other operator, calling out to Bright.
Bullseye approaching at 7 o'clock. Below us at an angle of 25 degrees. It's coming at us at maximum combat speed, sir.
When she heard Marker's voice, Sayla looked up. Both the main and sub-bridge ceilings had displays built into them, showing the 300-degree panorama of the heavens. The balance, 60 degrees, could be seen on another monitor to her rear. You're absolutely sure, Marker? Bright questioned. Images generated from laser sensor readings were useful even when there was a heavy Minovsky concentration, but they were only a simulation, a computer graphics model created by extrapolating from prior data, corrected for Minovsky-induced errors. They were far less precise than the three-dimensional displays used in the days of uninterrupted radar, but they nonetheless gave an idea of what was going on. Without these models, a skipper like Bright, a rank amateur, would have been completely helpless. Launch mobile suits! Bright yelled into the bridge phone. Anti-aircraft units stand by. No, wait. Prepare for a direct ship attack.
Looks like they've launched one of their mobile suits, sir, said Marker.
Then, interpreting his own reading,
It's Zaku, the Red Comet.
You're absolutely sure? Said Bright, again feeling a tinge of embarrassment because he kept asking the same question. He scanned a multi-screen display in front of him that monitored the inside of the ship. In the left corner, he could see the 2 gun cannons being loaded into the catapult mechanism. The Gundam was already poised for ejection. Bright grabbed the bridge phone and barked, Amuro, Shaw's on his way. Get ready to... Before Bright could finish his sentence, he heard a, Yes, sir, and saw the Gundam blast across the screen of his launch deck observation monitor. and saw the Gundam blast across the screen of his launch deck observation monitor. There we go. That's a long sentence with no punctuation. The mere sight of the MS, fully equipped with its beam rifle and shield, made him feel better. The others were next. Chief Petty Officer Ryu Jose, launching, sir.
Chief Petty Officer Kai Shiden, taken off.
As the two red-colored gun cannons soared out of the Pegasus port side hatch, Bright felt a lump form in his throat. Here he was, using trainees, teenagers, as mobile suit pilots, sticking them in cockpits the mecha men called coffins, entrusting the defense of the Pegasus to them. Through the static, he heard a fragment of a message from Amuro. Gundam intercepting Char, Musai heading straight under me. You better ready your stern missiles. The Musai cruiser was on a course that would take it beneath the Pegasus. Char, approaching ahead and slightly above the Musai and his Zaku, apparently intended to take on all three Federation mobile suits. Bright yelled out a command. Elevation minus 2.5 degrees. Launch missiles in a fan pattern. 2 barrages. Mirai, gripping the ship's helm, glanced over and commented, I hope our boys are a match for the Red Comet. Bright stared at her and said nothing. Why, he wondered, do women always say things best left unsaid? Then Oscar's yell assaulted Bright's ears from above. Our stern missiles missed, sir! 8 precious missiles had vanished into space. What about scattering some mines? Bright asked Oscar. Think it's possible? We're outside the shoal zone, so it's a little hard to hide 'em, but if we use Model 2s, they might not spot 'em. Model 2s, eh? Those won't work against the Musai. Model 2s were contact mines with a diameter of 10 centimeters, and when they dispersed in space, they were almost undetectable, but they wouldn't even put a dent in a cruiser. Then Oscar let out what sounded like a wounded cry. A heat-emitting object's headed straight for us! Missiles? Bright instinctively clutched the armrest of his captain's chair and looked up at the ceiling display screen. This time Marker answered, with a strained voice. Looks like a TAM, sir. Just one? Bright demanded, immediately learning the answer. One of the multi-screen displays to his left clearly showed a computer-generated image of a single large TAM headed toward them, along with its estimated course and time of arrival. Mirai, he barked out, initiate evasive maneuvers. Angle the ship up 19 degrees. Hard starboard. The Pegasus's emergency alarm sounded, and the crew first felt the G-force with their legs. For humans used to weightlessness, it wasn't a pleasant sensation. The blood drained from their heads, and those with low blood pressure felt dizzy. The instrument monitor went into countdown mode, ticking off each hundredth of a second. When the readout reached 1.5 seconds, Bright looked out the window of the bridge and saw, with the naked eye, a bright white light bearing down on them. The sensors built into the bridge window detected the light and automatically activated a protective filter shutting out much of it, but it was still too bright to look at directly. The next moment, the entire Pegasus was suddenly tossed violently upward, and its metal frame screamed as it twisted. The crew on the bridge, wearing seat belts, hung on for dear life, and prayed their bodies wouldn't be severed at the waist. Mirai, standing at the helm when the blast hit, ricocheted back and forth between the ceiling and the floor 3 times, and, had she not been wearing her normal suit, would have broken several bones. As it was, the shock was enough to kill some of the wounded soldiers on the ship. They had had no protection at all. Before the ship stopped shaking, Bright grabbed the phone built into the armrest of the captain's chair and yelled, Main engines! Give me every ounce of speed you have! Maximum acceleration! Mirai, wincing from a blow to her chest, carefully monitored the gauge for the ship's main engines. It read 90% of the way to redline, but could conceivably go 35% higher. She realized what Bright was trying to do. To use the force of the blast to help accelerate the ship and escape from the combat area. Oh, sorry, I only just saw your message, Stacky Botress. Thanks for tuning in. And yes, good morning to you too. Wonder how our mobile suits are doing out there, Bright said, half to himself. To his surprise, a voice behind him rasped in an almost scolding tone. Don't worry about them. It was Captain Paolo again. Fortunately, his gurney had been secured to the bottom of the bridge crane when the blast occurred, but the restraining straps had ripped open his wounds and the blankets covering him were now soaked in blood. Turning to the ship's medic, Sunmalo, Bright yelled, "See to the captain!" Then, speaking over the phone, he bellowed an order to the entire crew of the ship to inspect all stations for damage. A computer-generated image on a screen to his left displayed potential problem areas. The ship's external skin looked all right. Besides, wall film, a viscous plastic film which could seal off most holes, would automatically go into action. But only humans could restore the equipment inside the ship, and any that had a direct effect on the ship's combat status would have to be fixed right away. Bright asked Marker, "How many Tam-class missiles does a Musai cruiser normally carry?" and felt a chill run up his spine when he instantly received the answer. 4, sir. Out in space, Lieutenant Commander Shar had one weakness in the way he attacked. Right after he fired his rifle, he usually made his Zaku run in a straight line for 2 seconds. Lucky for him, however, Amuro, Kai, and Ryu were too inexperienced and too busy fighting for their lives to take advantage of the opportunity presented them. Amuro would spot the comet-like streak of Shar's Zaku in his center monitor, fix him in the sights of his rifle scope, and then fire! But the instant the beam left the gun barrel, his foe was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Shar kept firing at him. Like the gun cannons, the Gundam wielded a shield for protection, but it wasn't armored heavily enough to withstand direct hits from Mazaku's 120mm rifle forever. It had already absorbed several rounds, and one more direct hit would render it useless. And Amuro's brain was reaching a state of overload. At one point, Shar's Zaku came so close, its red mono eye seemed to fill Amuro's entire scope, and he reflexively screamed in terror. But then a miraculous thing happened. The Gundam moved with the agility of a judo expert. Amuro kicked the Gundam's left leg forward and felt the impact as it connected with something. If he had had time to look, he would even have seen a readout on the instrument panel showing the force of the impact. Shar was elated because he had caught the white MS within a 1-kilometer range. If he could just destroy its head, he could knock out its main TV camera. He confidently fired again, but the cat-like MS somehow managed to evade the burst. He cursed under his breath. At almost the same instant, he felt the impact above the ceiling of his cockpit. His center monitor went blank for a second, and the G-force threw him back into his seat. Incredibly, the white MS had kicked his Zaku and smashed its head camera. The Zaku spun backward. "And they call me the Red Comet?" Shar felt humiliated. Mobile suits hadn't been in use very long, but his Zaku was certainly the first to ever be physically kicked by the enemy. Smoldering anger erupted into fury. "You won't get away with this!" he screamed. His center monitor automatically switched over to an auxiliary camera and came to life again. 15 kilometers ahead, he could see the white MS. Its beam rifle flashed again, but as usual, missed. "Even a cruiser's beam cannon won't do you any good if you don't know how to aim," he yelled. But then a barrage of fire swept between the two dueling mobile suits. Kai and Ryu, in the gun cannons, had started firing in support of Amuro's gun cannon. Outclassed in firepower, Shar initiated a zigzag evasive maneuver. He knew he had to close in on the white MS fast, but he also knew that his opponent was no sitting duck. With his ammunition running low, he started to feel impatient. Incoming Tam! Yelled Marker, the operator on the Pegasus. Launch AMMs! Ordered Bright, suddenly remembering the ship's anti-missile missiles. They might not hit the target, but they were better than nothing. Elsewhere in the Pegasus, Frau Bow's back throbbed in pain as she headed back to the officers' quarters where she had earlier deposited the three young children. When the Xeon missile explosion had rocked the ship, she had been tending the injured with Sunmalo. One of the wounded had not had a restraining strap on him and had bounced back and forth several times between floor and ceiling, splattering the room with blood from his wounds. She had grabbed him and tried to restrain him, and now she was covered with his blood. Her blouse soaked and her hands still slippery, she drifted along on the ship's lift grip. Her own pain paled in the memory of it all.
Well, you've been fine, haven't you?
She said to the children when she reached them.
Yeah, but...
The oldest boy started to say something through his sniffles when the ship's alarm sounded again.
Hurry, put your belts on.
Frau urged, seating the three children on the sofa in the officer's cabin and strapping them in. Then the Pegasus shuddered again. This time the explosion seemed even closer than before. The covers on the bunk in the room, normally fastened with Velcro, flew off, and the three children screamed in terror and pain. Seat belts, even if made like restraining harnesses with 2 or 3 straps, dug into flesh. The younger boy's body slipped, and the strap around his chest pressed hard against his lungs. He began hacking. Then, as Frau and the children exclaimed in surprise, the emergency combat room lights went out. The little girl wriggled out of her seat belt, crawled into Frau's lap, and clung to her in fear. She still had the softness of an infant, but Frau hugged her as hard as she could. In the semi-darkness of the room, she made a mental note of the emergency oxygen source, the video monitor that connected them to the bridge, and the ship-wide phone.
Everyone, stay still now.
Frau took off her seat belt and tried to stand up, but the little girl wouldn't let go. Feeling indulgent, Frau carried the child as she felt her way along the wall to the officer's desk. With a little light leaking in from the hallway, she could barely make out objects in the room, but she needed a flashlight. She searched the desk, wondering who normally used it. There were only 2 ring binder notebooks in one drawer. Another contained the flashlight she sought, and a gun.
Maybe I'd better take it with me,
she thought for a second, looking at the gun, then realizing she'd never have an opportunity to use it. She picked up and switched on the flashlight, turned and spoke to the boys on the sofa.
You know, she said, I forgot to ask your names. My name's Katz. Katz Howen, said one. I'm, let's Coffin, said the younger boy.
Then, squinting in the glare of the flashlight, he asked it with a worried tone,
Did you find my folks?
Frau, at a loss for an answer, felt herself panic. Ignoring him for the moment, she turned to the little girl and asked,
And what's your name, honey? Keka Kitamoto, the girl stated. You said you'd looked for my mom.
I'm sorry, Frau apologized, trying to be as gentle as possible.
I haven't searched the whole ship, but when the fighting's over, I can look some more.
She wondered if there weren't some easy way to disengage from the kids. She'd already looked through several of the ship's civilian areas, but hadn't run into any parents searching for these children.
They've made quite a nice course correction,
said Lieutenant Junior Grade Dren, watching the Federation ship through binoculars from the bridge of the Musai cruiser. One more blast from a TAM missile would have made things perfect, but there were no more left.
Guess we'll just have to threaten them with our mega particle cannon,
Dren ventured.
You're entitled to your opinion,
the red-nosed Captain Haman Tram replied in a mocking tone.
But Captain Garba's part of Rear Admiral Caecilia's Space Attack Force. If we drive the Trojan horse toward California, we'll have an argument on our hands with Vice Admiral Dozel later.
That's Lieutenant Commander Shaw's problem, not ours, Dren retorted.
No, it's a problem for me. I'm captain of this ship,
Haman said. Well, Dren countered, then why did you agree to go along with this plan? Dren knew that correct protocol required obtaining some sort of permission from Dozel Zabi's mobile assault force before Shar contacted California. But they were in the shoal zone, and Dozel was on the space fortress Solomon, which was now blocked by Earth. Laser transmission was impossible.
It all depends on how much one of those new Federation suits is worth,
Haman added.
If it's really so important to snare one, all arguments over turf will be irrelevant. If not...
Then Dren replied, I guess we'll just have to pray its performance knocks our socks off. Against this, Haman was at a loss for words. In a huff, he turned his gaze to a computer display beside him. How about that? Dren thought. He hates Shar even more than I do. In war, there were always brave young men who distinguished themselves and soared in the ranks, and it wasn't easy to serve under them, especially when they were like Shar Aznable, a young lieutenant commander, overly talented and overly deferential to his superiors. Social class had little meaning in the young Zeon hierarchy, but Shar's attempt to reach California and deliver a present to Garma Zabi, his classmate from the military academy, was nonetheless an act of an overly ambitious ingrate. Someday, Shar would probably slip and show his true colors. Someday, Dren thought, Shar's luck would surely run out. In his gun cannon, it was all Kai Shiden could do to maintain his balance. The suit's left leg had taken a direct hit and thrown off his sense of equilibrium. Then, through the static, he heard the faint voice of Ryu Jose in the other gun cannon, saying, That's enough! Withdraw!
Withdraw? Where the hell to?
Kai screamed to himself in his cockpit in frustration. He had no idea where the Pegasus was. All laser search beams had been turned off because they were in an area that Shar could attack at any moment. And Kai couldn't very well leisurely wander around in open space looking for the mothership. Ryu, for his part, tried to support Amuro by training his sights on Shar's Zaku for the third time. He knew it was risky since the Red Comet tended to move in close to Amuro's Gundam, but he fired anyway. 3 times the 28-centimeter twin cannon on his suit's shoulders flared. Nothing happened, but at least he didn't hit the Gundam. Then he took his eyes off his gun sight, and to his surprise, Shar had disappeared. He activated his 360-degree monitoring camera and had his laser sensors trace the heavens. 30 seconds passed, and nothing happened. But then something giving off an IFF signal approached. It was the Gundam. Amuro's static-filled image and voice appeared in Ryu's cockpit.
To the Pegasus, it said.
Ryu tried to query him. What happened to the Red Comet, Amuro? He turned tail? He knew it was a dumb question. 3 state-of-the-art Federation mobile suits, after all, had gone after one Zaku, and hadn't even scored a single near miss. Amuro made the Gundam hold up its shield so Ryu could see. Ryu whistled low in appreciation. He did that to you? 1/4 of the shield was gone, revealing a cross-section of its honeycomb construction. Ryu was impressed not only by the accuracy of Shar's attacks, but by the fact that Amuro had been able to ward them off with the shield. To himself, he muttered a word he had heard recently. Maybe the guy's a new type. Shar only retreated because he ran out of ammunition. Mirai's statement was delivered with such conviction, Bright felt compelled to ask how she knew.
Sure, Shar lives up to his reputation of being a fearless pilot, she explained, but I think he's a lot more than that. He's also a brilliant tactician. Look how he made those mincing little attacks on the Gundam. Seems to me he wasn't even trying to destroy it. I think he's just trying to gather information on it.
As Mirai spoke, it dawned on her that even if Shar had run out of ammo, his decision to about face had been too sudden. You mean he seemed too in control? Pushed Bright.
Well, yes, Mirai said, hedging. Seems odd, doesn't it?
Returning her gaze, Bright was impressed by how intelligent and perceptive she suddenly seemed. Then Marker, perched above on the operator crane, announced something that gave Bright a Of course I'm getting another phone call. Give me a sec, folks. This one's important. Sorry about that. Where were we? I think we were near the top of the page. Returning her gaze, Bright was impressed by how intelligent and perceptive she suddenly seemed. Then Marker, perched above on the operator crane, announced something that gave Bright a chill.
Sir, he said with urgency, if we continue on our current course, we won't be able to descend toward Luna 2.
Ever since loading the mobile suits back on Side 7, Bright and the others had had no way of knowing the Pegasus's true assignment because most of the ship's key officers had been killed in the initial attack. And now Captain Paolo was fading in and out of consciousness from loss of blood, and unless he came to and told them, they would never know. Given his condition, returning to Luna 2 seemed the only logical choice. But every time the Pegasus tried to head toward the base, the Musai unleashed another beam attack. Unless they were prepared to directly confront the Zeon warship head-on, they would never make it. "Well, Miss Sailor," Bright called out across the bridge, "any communication with Luna 2?" For the first time, he noticed how pretty she looked. When the light was from behind her, her medium-length blonde hair seemed almost to glow.
Something's creating interference, she ventured. I think it's an enemy ship. Maybe the Musai cruiser. There's a horrible distortion in the laser oscillation.
Bright said, pondering a minute. I think we've been led into a trap by Shar. Then a voice came from near the entrance Then a voice came from near the entrance to the sub-bridge.
What's happening, Mr. Bright?
It was Amuro Ray, but he wasn't alone in wondering. The 50-odd crewmen already assembled in the room were all looking at Bright with the same worried expression on their faces.
For the last 3 hours, Bright explained, we've been traveling at full speed, but we haven't been able to shake the Zeon ship. If, as it seems, they're trying to prevent us from landing on Luna 2, I had planned to take the Pegasus into a broad loop around it, turn our prow 180 degrees, and approach from the opposite direction. But I just remembered something. Zeon's base, California, is in the way.
Hayato shouted out the next question.
You mean they might send some GAU attack carriers after us?
California wasn't a particularly large base, but to the inexperienced crew of the Pegasus, if it could dispatch 2 or 3 GAUs after them, it was terrifying. A crewman then mentioned,
I heard Garmazabi's in charge of California.
And at that point, a commotion ensued among the rest of those assembled. If they had been forced in range of Zeon's California base, and if Degwin Zabi's youngest son were there, it had to have been part of a master plan by Shar. Bright spoke bluntly.
We're all in this together, crew, and I need your opinion. Should we turn around and attack the Musai head-on, or try to scrape by California, use the Earth's gravity to boost our speed, and make it back to Luna 2?
The first answer came from Mirai.
Let's turn around and face the Musai, she said. If California hadn't been in Shar's plans from the beginning, he wouldn't have attacked like he did earlier. And if the Musai had had enough firepower on board, it would have come at us a lot more aggressively.
I agree with Mirai, Ryu Jose said. The Musai's probably out of ammo, and probably outgunned by us, in which case we should attack it. And who knows how many GAUs they have on California. No one seemed to take issue with Ryu's assessment, so it appeared a consensus had been reached. After a brief pause, Bright turned and announced, All crew, don normal suits again. We'll reverse course and destroy the Musai. Then we'll head straight for Luna 2. The crowd assembled on the sub-bridge scattered. Next, Bright broadcast an appeal throughout the entire ship. Some civilians on board have had prior military training or are former military personnel. All of those to whom this applies, whether male or female, are hereby ordered to help in the defense of this ship. Infants, children, their adult guardians, and any wounded troops must immediately move to a Ward E in the gravity sector. We will engage the Musai in 15 minutes. The sub-bridge fell silent. Taking advantage of the moment, Sayla Mass turned and looked up at Bright.
Excuse me, sir, but isn't there a map of the layout of the Pegasus somewhere? I'm having a little trouble understanding what's going on.
We can display one for you on one of the top screens, said Bright, but maybe Marker knows where there's a printed version.
There should be one in the right-hand drawer over there, Marker replied. Take a look.
Following his directions, Sayla finally found a document that graphically showed both the ship's layout and its internal communication channels. Want some coffee? Asked Bright. At the sound of the word, Sayla realized how parched her throat was, but it was Oscar who replied.
Good idea. Let's send Seaman Tamura down to the galley to bring us some.
Sorry, we had to throw in a Space Australian. It was either him or Slegger, and I don't remember if Slegger shows up in this. As if this were a signal, the crew on the bridge stopped talking and returned to their assignments. But before Sayla had time to digest the new information she had been given, the comm monitors in front of her all suddenly sparked to life with questions, requests, and protests from people stationed throughout the ship. There weren't enough normal suits to go around. What station to proceed to? Where was an assigned gun turret? The questions were all new to Sayla, and more than she could possibly have handled. All she could do was relay them to Bright. The rule of thumb on this ship, he explained, is that the officers stationed on each deck make those decisions. Tell them not to bother us with stuff like that. In the end, the only job Sayla could perform with confidence was to check the monitors and oversee the movement of civilians and wounded troops throughout the ship, and then relay the information to Sonmalo, the medic. 5 people in Sector 24 being moved to Ward E, she announced. No wounded among them. Immediately afterward, a young civilian woman appeared on a screen saying, "Hi, I'm Fra Bo. I've got 3 kids with me. How do I get to Ward E?" "Where are you currently located?" Sayla asked, thinking the woman looked awfully young to be their mother. "I'm in an officer's cabin," Fra reported. "Number 16, I think." Oh, great. I thought I muted myself. My bad. Sorry everybody had to hear that. In the midst of all this confusion, a gray-haired old man suddenly rushed into the sub-bridge area, yelling,
Where's the captain? What the hell's going on?
"What do you want?" Bright asked.
Humph, I asked to see the captain, not an ensign,
Sniffed the intruder. "Captain Paolo's in a coma right now, sir," Bright replied. I'm standing in for him."
You're taking over for Cassius Paolo as skipper?
The man was incredulous. "Yes, I am," Bright said, feeling irritated. "What can I do for you?"
Listen, the man huffed. I hope you're not serious about the earlier announcement. About taking on an enemy warship. In the condition we're in, it'd be madness.
"We've no other choice, sir," Bright retorted. "If you've nothing further to say, I'd appreciate your leaving the bridge."
I'm Jama Amov, son, the man said, drawing himself up. I may not know much about this ship, but I once commanded the heavy cruiser Buchanan. I'm here to help you.
The graybeard did look like he might have been a military man in his day, but he also looked like he could cause trouble. Bright surmised that he was probably a by-the-book ex-officer who had left the Buchanan after 10 years of service, unable to advance in the ranks beyond commander. "Times are different now," he said to the man. "The combat tactics we use these days are more like those of the pre-radar age. It's a whole new ballgame."
I know that,
Amov protested. "Well," Bright sighed, "I don't have time to explain the Pegasus to you, but we've got 24 missile launchers up in the fore of the ship. Why don't you take charge of those for us?"
Where's the command post for 'em?
"On the deck below us. Petty Officer Dublin should be down there. Take over for him, and tell him to move forward to the launch tubes."
Understood, skipper.
Reluctantly, the former commander turned around and started to leave. "There's a radar display in the command post," Bright called out after him, "but it's useless." The old man said nothing. He was wearing a normal suit, and tottered as he reached out to grab the lift grip. For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't make it. Bright got Dublin on the ship's phone immediately. "Dublin, a former ship commander named Jarmer's on his way to your area. I want you to pretend to let him take over, but you'll actually be in charge of all missile launch tubes from 1 to 24. But Skipper," Dublin answered, confused. "What should I tell him?" "Just say the comm channels are out, or something. He's one of these radar-age military men, you know. Let him think he's still in command." Bright put down the receiver and congratulated himself on having handled a sticky situation well. "Now, who's in charge of the stern missiles?" he asked.
Seaman Torkham, sir, replied Marker, and he's a veteran, so he's no problem.
As operator for the ship's internal operations, Marker had an uncanny ability to remember every last detail, all the way down to the number of shells left. Understood, said Bright. Then, turning to Mirai, he added, Okay, let's turn this ship around. He switched his comlink to ship-wide and wondered why the coffee was taking so long to arrive. On the Musai cruiser, Lieutenant Junior Grade Dren announced,
Captain Garma's leading 3 Gaw attack carriers, sir, and he'll be in firing range of the Federation ship 10 minutes from now.
Sounds like Garma, Shar answered. The guy'll never grow up.
I think he wants to distinguish himself in battle, sir. You know how he always says he doesn't want to be a desk jockey type of leader.
Something about Dren's know-it-all look, Shar realized, rubbed him the wrong way. He blurted out to the older man, and that's why Zeon'll never win this war against the Federation. Understand, Lieutenant? The instant Shar uttered the last 2 words, he knew he'd gone too far. Dren turned his back on him, as if saying in silent accusation,
You're just as young and inexperienced as Garma, Lieutenant Commander.
The younger a man, the more sensitive he is to perceived slights. If Shar differed at all from other people, it was in his normally superb self-control. Despite the fact that he was exceedingly young for his rank and responsibility, he possessed a type of maturity which gave him a powerful advantage in dealing with others, and was especially useful in the Zeon forces. Garma Zabi, on the other hand, had the typical psyche of someone his age, and it showed in his actions. If Garma's leading 3 Gaws, Shar continued smoothly, ignoring the overtones of the conversation with Dren, it means he has 18 DOP fighters. Here's hoping he can pull it off. Dren suddenly turned toward Shar again, smiled, and said,
So, if Captain Garma spots the Trojan horse first, he ought to be able to capture it, right?
Sure, Shar answered, deliberately being affable. By the way, I've got a hyper bazooka with my Zaku, right? Dren punched a couple keys on a terminal in front of them and displayed an answer.
Yes, sir, but it only has 3 shells available, and all 3 are refurbished duds from the battle the day before yesterday.
That's enough, Shar announced. I'm going out to help him. When he estimated that Garma's Gaw attack carrier had launched its DOP fighters, Shar took off in his Zaku. A Gaw was 50 meters long by 60 meters wide, and looked more like a fat, rounded aircraft than what used to be called a carrier on Earth. The main fuselage carried 5 mobile suits. The front part of each wing section had bays containing 4 DOP space fighters. The aft part of the wing section flared into giant nozzles, which, when the twin nuclear fusion engines were on full power, could propel the ship at twice the speed of a normal cruiser. The ship was also equipped with 2 mega particle cannons. The DOP carried by the Gaws was one of the first fighters developed by Zeon, and first put into operation when Minovsky particles were still largely a rumor. It bore a slight resemblance to 20th century military craft of the same category. The cockpit was stacked on top of the engine, giving the fighter a rather awkward silhouette, but providing the pilot with a superb field of vision in dogfights, where it was generally believed DOPs easily outclassed the Federation Flying Manta fighters. But in terms of modern firepower, the DOP was pathetically under-equipped, for it only had Vulcan guns and small missiles. Dren had tried to stop Shar when he first announced he was going to help Garma. If there was a heavy concentration of Minovsky particles in the area, he feared friendly machines might misinterpret Shar's Zaku IFF signals. If there was a real danger, in other words, that he might be blasted out of the picture by his own forces. But Shar had sniffed at the idea, saying, "How can I possibly play the coward now, Dren, when Garma's always been my friend? I want to help him out by ramming as many bazooka rockets as I can into the Trojan horse. I want to make the guy look good." Shar realized that the crew of the Pegasus had resolved to turn about, take on his cruiser, and break through to Luna 2. Oddly, however, he found himself sympathizing with the enemy ship's captain. "You're too late," he thought. 30 minutes earlier, and you would have only faced the Musai with its single MS, and you might have had a chance. The 18 DOP fighter bombers from the Gaus, each equipped with 4 limb anti-ship missiles, 2 classes under a TAM, could turn on a dime. With them dodging fire from the Pegasus's gun turrets while boring down on the ship, and with blasts from the twin megaparticle cannons on each Gao carrier, it should have been easy to deliver a fatal blow. But 10 minutes later, the error in Garma's carefully laid plans was revealed. 6 particle beams from the 3 Gaus streaked toward the Pegasus. But somehow, with stunning agility, she managed to evade them all. Even Mirai, manning the Pegasus' helm, couldn't explain it. She hadn't relied on directions from the ship operators, Marker or Oscar. To her surprise, she had merely noticed a strange feeling piercing her body and piloted the ship as if to avoid it. But even Bright, watching the enemy's particle beams zap by on either side of the ship, marveled at the speed with which she reacted. It occurred to him then that if she could just keep it up, they might even be able to trick the enemy into blasting each other out of the sky. The 3 mobile suits launched from the Pegasus, the Gundam and 2 gun cannons, squared off against the DOPs attacking from the Pegasus's port side. If used right, the explosive shells fired from the gun cannon's shoulders could take out more than one DOP, and sure enough, when Ryu fired, he turned 3 of them into stardust. "Hooray!" Ryu yelled, having scored the first kill. Hayato Kobayashi was standing in for Kai Shiden as the pilot of the other gun cannon. Like Ryu, rather than use its handheld beam rifle, he chose to fire the cannons built into the MS's shoulders, and immediately knocked out 2 more DOPs. The Gundam, for its part, destroyed another 2. Fortunately for Shar, his Zaku managed to approach the Pegasus without being hit by friendly fire. Weaving through blasts from the Federation ship, he executed his famed multiple S-shaped maneuver, and then headed straight toward the ship's blind spot, its underbelly. He held his fire. Federation ship bottoms were built with reinforced armor, which no Zaku bazooka or rifle had ever managed to pierce. He therefore moved around from the ship's belly, almost creasing the side of the ship, trying to head first for the bridge, then the main engine's magnetic core. Both sections were practically devoid of armor, and 2 blasts from his bazooka could put the entire ship out of action. As soon as he was in position, Shar trained his sights on the bridge. Then something impossible happened. Just as Shar had the bridge in his rifle scope, a white Federation MS slipped into view like a dog following a scent. Stunned, he felt a moment of real fear. But he wasn't a Xeon ace for nothing. Fear became anger. He yelled out loud from inside his cockpit, "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" It wasn't supposed to have happened. He had closed in on the ship's blind side and maneuvered his red Zaku into striking distance so fast no one should have noticed. By the time they did see him, they should have been pulverized. But here was his nemesis, the white MS, again. It caught the first shell he fired with its shield, and appeared to shake violently, but that was all. Then it lifted up the beam rifle it had in its right hand, and moved as if to draw a bead on his Zaku. Shar gritted his teeth and fired his bazooka again. The white MS's beam rifle also flared. It must have been sheer luck, but the beam from the enemy rifle vaporized the rocket Char fired and merely creased the top of his Zaku. A few particles diffusing on the edge of the beam burned part of the shield on his Zaku's left shoulder. It still looked fine, but he knew it was useless. Millions of tiny holes, invisible to the naked eye, had been blasted in it. Only one more shell left, Char thought to himself. He felt the same fear he'd felt the first time he'd gone into combat, when he had narrowly missed a Federation flying Manta fighter bomber. The 16-meter giant white MS came at Char at high speed, and he could almost sense the war cry of a seasoned pilot radiating from inside it. Had he known that the pilot of the MS, the Gundam, was a youth named Amuro who had logged a grand total of 2 hours flying time, he would have again suspected a true new type. But he had no way of knowing. The white MS unleashed one more blast from its beam rifle. Char managed to evade it, but then saw the enemy MS's left arm, which carried a half-destroyed shield, reach behind its back. Something flashed, and for a second he thought he saw an explosion. But he was wrong. The flare of light from a beam saber swept toward him, aiming for a point right between his eyes. Under his face mask, he felt as though cold ice had been shoved against his brow. The main orthoscopic monitor in front of him automatically filtered out the overexposure, and there, on the darkened display, the white MS's eyes appeared to glare at him in mockery. Zaku's didn't have beam sabers, although a month earlier Char had observed a test of a new Xeon MS model, a Rickdom, which did. When its hand had connected with the saber hilt, a direct link was formed to the main engine, and the hilt then emitted particle beams, which, when focused, formed a beam of megaparticles over a dozen meters long, the blade of the saber. But in the demonstration Char had seen, the Rickdom saber had lacked a filter of sufficient precision to contain the particle diffusion. The final beam blade was too broad. It still needed more work to be practical. The 16-meter tall white MS, now in front of him, was far beyond the experimental stage, and looked like a human fencer with a saber in its hand. The beam blade had a sharply defined edge, and it was coming right at him. Char started to unsheathe the heat axe on his Zaku's waist, knowing full well that although it, too, was made for close-quarter combat, it was like a toy compared to the destructive power of a beam saber. Then he put his Zaku into reverse, and not just because he was outclassed by the enemy's weaponry. Despite the heavy Minovsky interference, he heard Garma's voice issuing orders, saying, "Dop fighters, pull back. Gauze, start countdown for the mega-particle cannons." Char wasn't dumb enough to let himself be blasted to smithereens by a barrage of friendly fire. Following a few surviving Dops, he quickly steered his Zaku out of the area. And then the impossible happened again. 2 of the Gal carriers were destroyed. With its megaparticle cannon, the Federation ship scored a direct hit on the main engine of one, and the ensuing nuclear fusion explosion incinerated the entire ship, creating an enormous fireball that temporarily enveloped Garma's command ship. When Garma's Gao emerged from the inferno, it looked like a giant fire-spewing bird monster, the jets on both wings on full thrust for maximum speed. Nose first, it plunged forward toward the Federation Trojan horse, looking for a moment as if planning to ram it. Char, watching from afar, felt helpless. He knew Garma was personally manning the helm. Only Garma, that brash young Zabi kid, would do such a crazy thing. His mind screamed, "Garma, stop!" But at the same instant, another, utterly different thought flashed through his consciousness. Garma was, after all, one of the Zabi family. So what if he died? The Federation ship was merely aiding his own quest for revenge. He should feel lucky. He looked over toward the Musai cruiser. He couldn't make out his own ship's shape in the darkness between the stars, but he knew Dren was doing his job. One after another, blasts from its mega particle cannon streaked toward the Federation horse. Still, to his amazement, the Trojan horse never received a single direct hit, despite being in the line of fire of both the Musai and Garma's Gao. Perhaps, he thought for an instant, the horse was possessed by demonic forces. Yet another, even more chilling notion then occurred to him. Perhaps the entire crew was a specially formed unit of new types. No, he reminded himself again, that would be impossible. The only people in the world who knew about new types were himself, Rear Admiral Caecilia, and Dr. Flanagan Rom of the Flanagan Institute. Suddenly, a beam of light pierced the prow of the horse. Even Shar could see the ship shake violently. And, as if on cue, the white MS that had been dogging him reversed course. Shar knew it was a useless gesture, but he fired his last bazooka rocket at it anyway, and the enemy pilot dodged it with ease. Even though the area was heavily saturated with Minovsky particles, Shar miraculously heard a transmission. It was intermittent and hard to make out amid the static, but it sounded like the voice of young Garma Zabi shouting, "Glory to the Principality of Zeon!" Glory to the Principality of Zeon? That's Garma, all right, Shar thought, now convinced that his former classmate was at the helm. 20 kilometers out from the Trojan horse, Garma's Gao carrier caught 3 blasts from the enemy's megaparticle cannon and turned into a ball of light. The image of a young man teasing the lock of his bangs with the fingers of his right hand flashed through Shar's mind. Now he realized, with a twinge of sadness, Garmazabi would carry that trait to his grave. In war, it occurred to him, the only reward for Garma's type of overzealousness was death. Shar signaled the order to retreat with his laser oscillator, and began heading back to his ship. 6 DOP fighters fell into line behind him, but he wondered if any of them would be able to make it to the Solomon base. It was odd how little he felt about Garma. He never would have made lieutenant commander without Garma's string pulling, but that was Garma's problem. At the academy, where Shar was always head of his class, Garma had often said, "I want you to be my staff officer in future. I need you to stay alive till then, so don't do anything rash." With a growing sense of unease, Shar thought, Vice Admiral Dozel Zabi won't be happy about this. And with that, we'll call it for today. Tune in again next week for the next chapter or 2 of Mobile Suit Gundam, the first volume, Awakening, by Yoshiyuki Tomino. Yes, the man, the myth, the legend. Alrighty, so yeah, hope people dug it. If you're listening to this after the fact, hi, I do these live, that's why they're so rough. I usually start around 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. And on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So if you are interested in listening to more live narration live, you can listen live at those times, on those days. The other stuff I'm doing right now, on Wednesdays and Fridays, I'm doing installments from Hyperion, or the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. If you want a roaring, sprawling epic of a space opera, that is one to check out for sure, with lots of poetry. Thank you, Stecky Botris. I appreciate it. I'm glad you think the voices are top notch, especially considering my head is like filled with cotton right now. It's not that I have a head cold, it's that I had to do a lot of work outside yesterday and it's friggin' cold. So maybe I have a cold. Whatever. Anyway, Um, thank you. I'm trying. I'm trying to do kind of a division of like some of them being half approximations of the English dub of the TV series, and then the other half being something else entirely, just so I can differentiate the characters in my head. Like I don't think Fra Bow has ever had a Southern Belle accent, but we're going that way because otherwise I've got like 5 girls I've got to remember the voices for, and I'm not good at those because my voice is not that high. Actually, it's more than that because I'm gonna have to deal with Lala and Caecilia as well at some point, and what's her face? The Federation woman that Amuro gets a hard on for. Matilda? Matilda. I have to remember her too. Um, I don't think Ramba Ral ever shows up in this. He's mentioned tangentially via the Jimba Ral stuff, but that's kind of it. Um, if you have either read or seen the prequel segment of Gundam the Origin, some of this is going to seem pretty familiar, and that's what Gundam the Origin ripped from. It took this stuff isn't in much of those little details. Most of those are not in the original anime series. Some of them are in the movies a little bit. The thing the Origin winds up doing is kind of manages to take all three, the novelization, the original animated series, and the movie trilogy, and kind of weave them into a single narrative. While excluding certain aspects of all three. Um, I find that the prequel section of the origin is the manga anyway, and then the animated series is the weakest because it's a little it it shows like if you're accustomed to the general pacing and flow of the original series, it's like oh something's the writing here is not it's up to a different standard. It's from a different perspective. It's not awful. I don't think all the takes are bad. Um, but it's kind of like this doesn't quite work. It doesn't work on every level. I find that's more of a personal thing, a personal gripe I have with it. But it's still good. The manga at least is great because it's got basically every single one of your favorite moments from the original series and the movement movies like turned up to 11. Um, they're very good. Like the Ramba Rao, it's Nozaku, my boy. Nozaku is like absolutely phenomenal. There's a scene when they're doing when Zeon is doing its attack on Jaburo, and literally in the background of all the panels are the lyrics to the Soldiers of Sorrow, and it's just absolutely dynamite. It's like, oh my god, goosebumps and chills. The artwork's phenomenal as well. When it's in color, it's got this great watercolor palette that just works. It's very nice. Highly recommend. Um, the prequel portion I'm not so fond of, where it's like, oh well, actually there were mobile suits before the mobile suits. Oh, wait a minute, how does that work? Not just prototype models, just ones nobody ever talked about at any point in time, ever. Nobody ever talked about them. Yeah, we had gun cannons forever. What? How? Gun tanks I can about believe, but it sort of feels self-defeating in that regard. Anyway, it's fun. Um, Also, Char is like an unrepentant psychopath, and there's some really, honestly, everything in that prequel segment is like involving Char is just outright goofy because it's like, come on, come on, you did not get into a fight with a suit of armor, a dude hiding in a suit of armor that tried to kill you that happens to look almost exactly like the Gundam. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. Stop trying to convince me it did. It's Shar fan fiction is how it feels. It's like Shar wrote this in order to make himself look better, and it kind of makes him look like a goof. Anyway, the novel is a bit more tempered in that regard. Is he's not a very nice man. Shar is not a nice man. He's never been a nice man, but he makes a bit more sense. It's not quite as self-aggrandizing, and his flaws are immediately apparent. or are apparent immediately. I'm having a really hard time with my command of the English language right now. I'm so sorry. Like you can tell, like he's getting upset. He's getting upset right off rip at the Gundam. He's like immediately upset. Why is this thing outperforming me? What's going on? I'm not having it. It's bad. Stupid. Which is a bit more true to the original series, where he just kind of winds up. It's like his best opportunities to have dealt with Amuro are very early on, and then Amuro starts like going way out to here in terms of piloting ability. So by the time something like Char's counterattack happens, it's basically there's just no hope. Like he never had a chance. Of course, he also kind of wanted to be stopped in Char's counterattack. It's weird what goes on there. It's a little baffling. Um, it's mostly that the transition from him being Quattro Bagina in Zeta to Char Aznable, dictator of new Xeon movement, is kind of a tough pill to swallow. Incidentally, an apocalyptic Neo Xeon movement. It's like, wait a minute, hold up. Why are you trying to kill the Earth? To get the people off of it so that we could all be new types. I'm not sure that's a good plan, buddy. I don't. And also to save the Earth's ecology. I think throwing a rock at it's going to hurt. I don't think that's a great plan. But I don't know. That's part of the point, is he's like become irredeemable, and you can't deal with his issues. The only one better than that is Hathaway's Flash, and I've read um, significant portions of the novelization of that. I might get around to doing that. There's some of that that's been translated. I don't think the whole thing is translated yet. I haven't checked in a year or two. Um, the movie's quite good. It ends right before things get wild. Um, but it's a doozy. Like it's a real doozy. Because it really goes like the protagonist is like kind of this rebel without a cause. It's great and it's beautifully rendered. Where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a rebel without a cause. I'm gonna do rebel things because I'm rebelling. I rebel. I rebel and stuff. And it's like, well, that's not very productive. And because you didn't have any kind of a goal, you were just doing things, there are consequences. And they are dire. Wowzers. No spoilers on that end. If they eventually make movie 2 and 3 of Hathaway's Flash, maybe if they diverted resources away from like Unicorn 2, which I don't think anyone really wants. Come on, who really wants Unicorn 2? Fukui's a hack. Strong opinions. Strong opinions from Frag this day. Alrighty, I'm calling it. See you all later in the week, possibly. Otherwise, see you all next week. Stay safe, stay sane, stay toasty or cool as per your preference or geolocation permit, and be decent to each other.